United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks everyone for coming this morning. We will start with
school. Students leave at 3:30. So I have, I might have a meeting. I leave my daughter's in the classroom while I go to the meeting. I might have a couple students day after school, and I'll work with those students. My daughter's in the classroom.
Yeah, I think, part of the deal with the language is flexibility. There is some problem if you start defining all those things, then you paint yourself into a corner. And then enforcement becomes strictly by the letter of the law. It's kind of like a dress code. If you make a long list of to-dos and not to-dos, then you're enforcing each and every one of them. If you say no hats, then you become a hat police. If you say no straps, or no this, or no that, you're going down your checklist checking everything. And then you also set up for everyone to go, well, he's wearing this hat, but yet he's a custodian and may need to wear that hat in a specific situation, to keep things out of his hair, or if he's welding, whatever. It doesn't allow for flexibility in situations. So I'm always careful in policy language not to paint ourselves into too tight of a corner. However, at the same time, we need flexibility for the supervisors and still have an enforceable policy. In this situation, that would be one as a building principal. I would be looking at the fact, do I have students in session? Is it just a few kids in the classroom? And I could make an exception to that if I feel it's not impacting the educational environment. So one thing about HR in education, it's not as black and white as people think it should be. It's more different areas of gray, and how do we manage all that? Because we're in a people business, and you're always going to have extenuating circumstances and aggravating circumstances, and you have to take those into account. So I don't want to paint it that tight.
I'd like to vet that out against your policy, though.
Mm-hmm.
See, where would you fall on that? He's bringing his kids in the classroom, and he has 3 kids that are extra after class. Let's say it wasn't for being awesome in class, so you get a couple problem kids in there. Do you fall on the side of that's okay, or do you fall on the side of what's our incurred liability here for putting young kids in with an old kid?
Well, then he would have the responsibility of that supervision.
Got a meeting.
Well, then no. No, if he can't be supervising the child, then I would have to say absolutely not. That's part of the condition in the policy, is that the parent be the supervisor of that child and take full responsibilities for supervision during that time, and that they're not out of their control. So the parent assumes that responsibility, and they have to be responsible. If he's got a job commitment that he's got to be at, I would say no, that takes precedent. He's still under contracted time. So, but you've also got to look at the situation. So is there an emergent situation? Does he have an emergency with supervision of that child in an after-school time where he's got a faculty meeting? Can I bring him up to speed as the building principal on that faculty meeting the next morning? There's so many variables that enter into this that I don't think you can just say one situation fits all. So just given the limited information I have, those are the questions I would ask as a building supervisor right away.
But you're setting yourself up for that across the board from 3:30 to 4 in every school. That then I have trouble. Is that in abnormal circumstance, or if you're going to set yourself up where anybody that has kids bring them in from 3:30 to 4 every day, it happens. They can never leave the classroom. The principal always has to go out of the way to have that meeting the next morning.
That's
and
why
if you
the
have
board
that
sets
many
policy,
instances-
not myself. So I'm bringing the policy to
Right, but you
this.
have to enforce it. I'm not opposed to it
Right.
on the surface, but
But the other bottom line is, I'll enforce what the board puts in place. So even though it's my job to enforce it, and I may not agree with something, if that's what the board wants done, then I'll make sure it gets done. The issue is going to be, if you see that as absolute contracted time, that we don't want kids on the premises during that time, then that's a board choice. I think that, again, daycare is a big thing. In today's world, both parents are usually working. Those are issues. Do we want to make those allowances for people, or do we want to basically hold them to the letter of the law. You can go either way. So it does become an enforcement issue either way. Obviously, it's been part of the culture for quite a while, so switching that over tomorrow is going to be an issue. We didn't get there overnight, and we're not going to clean it up overnight. But those are, this is a start in putting that in place. It continues to be a huge problem. It does give principals the ability to say no.
That's, I don't know if it's been a huge problem. I'm just asking that. You're ready?
But I haven't been here long enough to really see if it's been a huge problem. I mean, you're talking, I've been here 4 months, and most of that's been summer. So I haven't really witnessed it in the buildings like you guys are saying that you've seen or know about. I'm not aware of those situations yet. But obviously it's bringing it to the conversation.
Did you have something? I'll go after her.
Just the comment I want to make, when I was hired, I don't know, 10, 11 years ago, I was hired as a lunchroom. And I was a stay-at-home mom, and the only way they could get me to come in was by allowing me to bring my 3-year-old daughter with me during the lunchroom. Now, I was responsible, this was under Principal Cummings, I believe. This was, and Mr. Smith also carried through with it. Now, I was responsible for my daughter. She had to be indoors when I was indoors and outdoors when I was outdoors. But that was how they were able to fill those positions. I don't know if they still do that or not. I just am throwing that out there so you're aware that that might be a need, just so they can get people in. Because when I was making $300, I couldn't afford to pay twice that much for somebody to watch my child.
You know, one of the things that, the two things that we have to be concerned with are instruction and liability for safety. Those are the key things. As sitting here listening to it, I know some districts have gone to what they call service learning projects for their students, and like for our student counselor, I mean, they're trained babysitters, and so for their service learning projects, I don't know if they have to have one here to graduate yet, but I'll find out. But that could be a service, that could be offered to. I mean, there are ways around it that we would look into for sure, because I think the policy is good, but I agree with John, trying to nail it to it's going to be difficult. So what kinds of things can we do to support those folks who might need that? And I mean, kids are always looking for something to do, and some great things that not only does it would be free for us, but also beneficial for them. They can pay back or give back to a community, especially a learning community.
One way I view policy that I'm used to is that policies are the overriding umbrella of what you want to try and make sure that you're keeping your eyes on. Procedure, or how you're going to carry that out. Procedure is what affects building administrators and myself the most. How we enforce that policy. So you have a policy. The actual ins and outs in the day-to-day of how you're going to enforce that policy becomes procedure. Procedure is more at the administrative level. Policy is at the purview of the board. The board writes policy, and how we carry out that policy is the procedure piece. So try to think of it that way. And so, I mean, we're going to be, whenever you put a policy in place, procedure follows. And once you put something, you find things that work and find things that don't work. And you develop that policy over time, it becomes very workable. So if we're going to have a dress code, how are we going to enforce it? Right? If we're going to have a no hat policy, how are we going to enforce it? Those are all things, that the conversations that take place as you start to enforce policies, and we develop procedures that go with those policies. I don't know if that helps in your view, but that's kind of.
But it's usually at the building level when you get those procedures.
And each building has different issues.
Yeah.
So that was my point, Don Watkins. My question would only be if the policy, I agree with John, we can't nail it completely down, but if we have a significant difference between our administrators and buildings, we're going to run into problems.
Interlocal
I agree
agreement.
with that.
Ooh, is that what it's called?
Yes.
There's your motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other questions?
Let me get it straight then. We'll transport the child, and they do not reimburse us for the cost of this?
It says,
So we, if we had enough bus drivers, we could just use the bus to take the student there. Right now, we're short on bus drivers, so Scott and I were working together to try to figure out a creative way to transport a student. The state changed the law so that now there's something called an e-bus, a type e-bus, so we can use a van, one of our vans to do that. That van has to meet certain criteria, and long story short, currently the van that we have doesn't meet criteria. We need to replace the other van anyway, then it will. So, hopefully within the next month, we're coming back to you saying we're ready to buy a new van, that'll meet the criteria, and we can get reimbursed for it.
So we're not currently going to be reimbursed until we have the new van.
The next question, is the child have special needs? Is that the reason?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's what you're getting, yes, and
Yeah,
the reason is
okay.
that we can't, yeah.
That helps.
That's what you're thinking.
We're asking Bozeman to provide the
Yeah.
service.
Okay.
It's either that or a program.
Yeah, I just had trouble with just a
So there-
normal, yeah.
there's no reimbursement for the bus, it comes out of our pocket to
Yeah.
pay them. Yeah.
Yes, once we do get the e-bus approved, it'd be a 50-cent mile reimbursement.
So the cost behind it, we're starting with placing the cost inside the idea of grant, and whether or not that gets approved is something in the future. If
For the new van.
For the type E-bus, the purchase of. If it's approved to be purchased through the grant, then no problem, we'll support and buy the bus. If it's
Okay.
not, then she'll have to rebudget, et cetera. We will then have to figure out where to buy that bus from.
We can also, if we can hire enough bus drivers, we're just short of people, and we have a
Sure.
bus that can take them. Of course, that's not as cost effective, so,
That helps.
type E van would be more cost effective if we
All right.
can make that work.
Did you get a second to the motion?
I did. From Brian.
Yeah, Frank.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? All those in favor of the motion in a second signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. 4.6, budget and trustee financial summary. Mr. Bates.
So, let's talk GASB real quick. GASB 45 was the old GASB that discussed the other post-employment benefits. The GASB changed that to GASB 75, and just to go back to 45, part of the requirement is to report what was called the annual required contribution for our liabilities. That's an every 2-year actuarial study, and with GASB, the change in the rule is that you don't report the annual required contribution, but you report the entire liability. Last Friday, I got the numbers from the actuary, popped the annual required contribution into Mayfair's, and printed out the reports on Monday. I put the wrong number in. It's just an error. So on page 103, in your board book, it's the fourth number down. The other post-employment benefits, it's listed at $240,501.02. It should be in the elementary district $1,711,006.88. This is just a reporting requirement. I don't think there are any schools, or any governments that actually put money aside for this liability. It's a reporting requirement. On page 152, the high school equivalent to the, so I take the full liability and split it between the districts. Basically a 70-30 split. So the number was $97,803.98. the entire liability, or at least the high school's portion of it, is $695,811.12. I made those changes a day or so ago, yesterday actually, and so the entire OPEB liability is $2,406,818. So that's the only change that I have in the board book and the reports. It doesn't change fund balance, it doesn't change expenditures or revenues, it doesn't change anything on the budget. So just noted that those numbers have changed, and if it meets the board's approval, I will submit today and get the chairman's signature, and we'll be on our way for this year. Are there any questions on the budget, revenues, expenditures, balance sheets?
Scrolling at that.
You want to keep looking, Frank?
That's a mechanics thing, like, use an explanation of the, how we balanced our shortfall due to the, Bill 2 reductions. But I get it, I guess, I'd be more for the common good, but you explained it pretty good to me the other day. And got through where enough with Ted's presence to sit down and get the 2 hours and walk through.